Good afternoon and good evening. I'm Cynthia Hoven from Eurythmy Online, and this is our lecture series of studies in anthroposophy. And this is the newest series beginning this week, the series of autumn studies in the season of Michael. And we will have 7 talks in this series. And as I've written in some of my essays to you, this is, for me, a series that I think is of tremendous contemporary importance. And so I'm really glad to see you here to work on this with you. And it would be my hope even that more people will join us in the course of the weeks ahead, because I am becoming aware that this theme is increasingly critically important for our age, for our humanity. So welcome and join me on this journey. What does it mean to be a human being, especially in the light of this age of technology? And I feel that this is a series that is of urgency, but it's also something that I'm quite joyful about, because although the challenges to our humanity are great, the work that we're evolving towards is brilliant and exciting. And so I hope that as we balance these two topics, these two perspectives in our talk, that I will leave you each time with joy and courage and excitement, a Michaelic journey. I'd like to begin by explaining exactly what it is that I'm on fire about in this series. And I begin with a little bit of a biographical sketch. As I've told you before, I grew up in the Midwest with a fairly classical education. I went to Purdue University, an engineering university, and I chose that at least in part for the solid science foundation that I would have. And I have a double major. One of the majors is in general sciences, on the emphasis on math and physics, and the other one is in psychology. And I wanted to have these two perspectives, although I dare say my psychology training was a great disappointment, because that was in the age when we learned really a lot of B.F. Skinner about behaviorism. And it was clear to me that the human being was really being considered as this black box, manageable, programmable behavior box. And that was tremendously dissatisfying for me. After that, as I've told you, I took what ended up being 2 years to travel around the world. I wanted to visit other cultures, and I was really looking for a spiritual teacher. And eventually, when I was the ripe age of 23, I began my 4-year eurythmy training, which gave me an alternative journey to working with the sciences. And I began to work with an artistic path, which was not something that I anticipated, because I am not, even to this day, I am not by temperament an artist, but I needed that to learn to develop sensibilities, a fine feeling for the aesthetics of the world. And at the end of the 4-year training, friends, I finally had a year working on the stage group at the Goetheanum, and then began a 1.5 year training in therapeutic eurythmy. And that was the beginning of this next stage that I'm working on, understanding the physiological basis of eurythmy, or esoteric physiology, which is a study that I absolutely love. This went on for many years as I developed a practice as a therapeutic eurythmist, and also then more and more began to work with adult education in eurythmy, and eventually came to the point then, after decades of all of this, where COVID came to all of us. No, it was actually a phase before that. In about 2012, I had a little shift in my work, working with adults. And I was urged to start an online eurythmy curriculum. And before that moment, I would have been the last one to do an online curriculum because I thought it really is impossible to show the essence of etheric movement on the screen. And then someone convinced me that because of my decades of teaching, I had the capacity to language how one does eurythmy. And that brought me to the website. And as I've told you once before, I was flayed and condemned and drew a lot of criticism, as well as a fair amount of thanks and praise for it. And that takes us up to 2020, the year of the quarantines. And that's when I began these online eurythmy webinars. And at that time, I got in touch with my colleague in the sciences, Andrew Linnell, who has a website called Mystech or Mystical Technology. And he is looking at how Rudolf Steiner saw the coming generations of technology and the human being and the particular challenges that would present to us. And I'm going to turn to that a lot in the weeks to come. And Rudolf Steiner said, the human being must come to the point of understanding how to interact with the machine in such a way that we can supersede the electricity and the machine will respond to the etheric body of the human being according to the degree of their morality. So a person should be able to walk up to a machine, he describes, and make certain movements, and the machine would respond. And this study group called Mystech is trying to really crawl under the skin of technology, physics, quantum mechanics, and so on, and help us to articulate the future of the relationship of the human being to technology. So he was very proud of what I was doing, and we've been collaborating some. So in my journey, I've also come to understand, as many of you know, Rudolf Steiner's story of evolution and developed a new relationship to the question of who could Christ be, really? What would it mean to have resurrection? That the life forces can be stronger than the death forces. Who is Michael? Which is, of course, a topical question for this season that we're in now. And this increasing study of technology. And many of you have been with me already as I began to question, what is ChatGPT? That almost brings us up to the present moment. And I begin to become more interested in the current phenomenon. As I mentioned a moment ago, the emergence of ChatGPT 18 months ago caused me great alarm because it made me feel the capacity for us to be deceived by the lies, by fake news, by the manipulation of the media, which could put any kind of words into anyone's mouth. Such things made me see an ever stronger outline exactly the nature of what we're facing as we go forwards. And there burns in me the question now, and I hope to implant the question into you of, how can I tell who is really speaking? The question begins with, if I see an essay that's been written by someone, how can I tell who wrote it? Was it a machine-generated essay, in which case there's no way to feel the heart, and also no way to know where the words have come from that have been scrambled together to create an artificial essay? How can I know then also who is talking if I could see a movie that has been completely generated by technology or a newscast that has people telling lies? How can I know? And in the end, this whole question takes me, and I hope you, back to the realization that this all depends on our human heart. How can myself experience the self that I'm talking to? That includes, is it possible for you to really sense that it's me talking to you and not some computer generated likeness of me? Can you feel the quiet passion of my heart? And if you can feel that, what is it in you that's capable of those perceptions? And that experience, of course, is matched for all of us when we go to a store or any social relationship with other people. Is that person really present in their being or not? Is that person just parroting thoughts, chattering, stringing words together without really constructing their thoughts? They're not fully in their humanness if they're doing that. Therefore, can you recognize, can you go deeper and find their essence? Not by preaching, but looking for their essence. And perhaps you can bring them closer to themselves in conversation. I don't know. I'm not going to try to answer those questions with you right now. But those are the pursuits that I'm following. We'll come to all these topics. But in my exploration of these fields, then I've come to a number of very important resources, and I've written out the names of many of them that I'm going to give to you in a PDF in the written notes that you get at the end of this talk. But I'm going to just pick up a few of these books for you. This one is a book that I started reading in, my goodness, 1980, 85, 86, the Michael Mystery. This is about the Archangel Michael. I know there will be some of you who are familiar with this work, others of you who are at least familiar with the name of Michael or Michael. And you know that this is the name of an archangel who is very concerned with the human being. And I will weave the perspective of Michael into our talks going forwards. And the contents of this book are a series of some 30, 35 letters, each about 4 or 5 page long, that Rudolf Steiner wrote, composed in the last 6, 8 months of his life when he was lying on his deathbed. And he made the very last thing that he wrote to give to humanity was an urgent call that humanity come to terms with subnature. And I'll read that to you later on tonight, and I will include those texts in what I send out to you. I've also found some other resources. I'm grateful that some people asked me to pay attention to a movie on Netflix, a documentary of sorts called The Social Dilemma. Again, the name is in the PDF I'll send out to you. But The Social Dilemma is, I would say, an expose about the kind of work that has been done by the media company to make people, and especially young people, but actually all of us, addicted more and more to the computers, especially to social media, by using what they call clickbait. And essentially, we boil down, it comes down to the question that every time you click on something, which has been What you're given to click on has been through countless genius algorithms harvested so that you get exactly the one that you personally are most likely to click on, whether it's about vacations in Bermuda or how to sell your car or which kind of clothes you want to wear. Those that you have ever clicked on before are all in your feed. And something is there that's enticing for you to click on. And if you click on that, then the company that's doing the advertisement gets 0.001 cents or something like that. And that has evolved into the largest economy, they say, that has ever existed. Perhaps I've got that wrong. It might not be that large, but it is larger than the economy of many nations. The kind of money that travels through what is known as clickbait. So this is a very real and present phenomenon in our life. And what a waste, no? Social Dilemma, it's a movie that's on Netflix, and I hope it stays there a long time. The expose is interviews with people who have worked for Twitter, I think Twitter, and Facebook, Meta, Instagram, and Snapchat, and all the rest of those sites. Another book that I have found very recently is written only in German. And this book, I would say, has changed my life. I put it up here, but the thing is, it's written in German and it's not translated into English. But much of what we're going to be working on is the content of this fabulous book in German. It's written by Andreas Nieder, and it's called Der Mensch zwischen Über- und Unternatur, das Erwachen des Bewusstseins im Ätherischen und die Gefährdung der freien Kräfte. Again, I put the name and what I'm going to hand out to you, and if you can read German, do whatever you can to get the book. It's called The Human Being Between Nature and Between Subnature and Supernature, the Awakening of Consciousness in the Etheric World, and the Threats and Dangers to the Free Forces of our Etheric. And as I am trying to say to you, I think there's nothing more important than this topic presently. It has answered so many questions for me that no one else has been able to answer yet. Go further, this one, A Road to Sacred Creation. And this is a compilation of just dozens, many dozens of paragraphs and pages that Rudolf Steiner wrote about technology, foreseeing what's coming. And then, my friends, there's also a book that I was so happy to find recently called The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And he's a psychologist. I believe he's British. I'm not certain. And he talks at great length about what has happened to the upcoming generation, specifically, but not only Generation Z, the children, the young people who hit puberty in around 1910, and the extraordinarily alarming increase in rates of mental anguish, depressions, hospitalizations, suicides of the young people, in statistical relationship to how much the computer, the cell phones have entered their life. And it's the girls who have the mental breakdowns, especially, and the boys being confronted so much with video games, violence, and pornography more often than young women. They are also getting a perverted or twisted view of life, which is also causing to their danger. And what is also involved in that is the fact that in these age of helicopter parents and real or imagined threats to the children's safety and the increasing use of computers as babysitters, children don't have a sufficiently robust childhood anymore. And there are so many children aren't able to go out into the streets and play and ride their bicycles on the streets and have the thrill and the threat of a campfire and a camp out with their buddies and things like that, because we are so concerned for them. And in that, one can track the dangers through that to brain development. One can find that, but one can also see the children aren't developing the courage and the independence and self-sufficiency to go into the world. So these are some of the things that I'm working on, and I invite you to get very interested in these topics with me for this autumn season of Michael, and bring your friends. By all means, bring your friends. So after finding this German book, I mentioned to you already this last year, my trip essentially started with reading this book and seeing the opera Parsifal. And from there, then, I happened to take a 6-week trip around the world, lecturing in many countries. And everywhere I went, literally, communities, individuals, and groups of people are witnessing and are aware that they're witnessing I'll use the word right now, the threats, the challenges to our society because of the increasing use of computers. Even in paradisical Bali, people are concerned. When I was in India, I had computer scientists working on AI in my lecture courses. They were concerned. In Dubai, the land of the privileged and the wealthy, they were concerned. Everywhere, this is a burning question. And I hope that you, and I include in you, students of anthroposophy, that you're concerned. And with this, the absolute necessity for our etheric development stands in clear outline, and it's become ever more possible for me to articulate exactly what eurythmy can do for us and to us, and how I almost think it's desperately urgent that we pay attention to this and do our eurythmy practices. With that, we are cultivating our etheric forces, not just our exercise forces, not just imagining a bright and glorious future, but actually engaging our free etheric wills. And all right, after all of these words about my desperate and passionate interest in this, I would say I have also tremendous courage and joy about being a human being. And I can see there are ways through. I just would like to look at everyone in the heart and invite them to go through this. Because indeed, we human beings need to take the next step in our evolution. The universe is calling for that. And yes, as you know from your own study and also from working with me, that a fundamental consideration in anthroposophy is that we are involved in a long journey of evolution in consciousness. And we have passed through the age of mythology, passed through the age of the great mystics, of the age of the religious scholars. We have most recently moved really into the age of the machine, the Industrial Revolution. And our age will be known, I believe, as the age of electronic media and computer technology. And what does that mean? What does that mean to be a human being? And I would like to just take a a moment now to call into this talk some considerations about on this issue. And I would like to acknowledge some of the way that I frame the next thoughts on a weekend workshop that I just had for the Michaelmas season, in which I met with about 70 biodynamic farmers at one of our local farms. And we were working on creating the biodynamic preparations to put into the compost piles. And this is alchemical earth magic, if you will. And this earth magic is beautiful and sober and joyful and healing and focused work. And then we also had some lectures during this 3-day workshop. And anecdotally, I will also share that on Michaelmas morning, September 29th at 3 a.m, while we were all fast asleep, at 3 a.m, we were all awakened by a 4.2 earthquake, whose epicenter was only 2 miles away from the place that we were doing our work. And somehow it seemed, perhaps superstitiously and perhaps in reality, it seemed as if the earth forces were acknowledging our work. And I couldn't say either really welcoming it or saying, the dragons have awoken. I don't know. But in the course of this, we had the gift of the presence of a man who is the priest of this Christian Community Church in San Francisco, named Michaelic. And he gave us a very nice talk, inspired talk about the nature of the human being. And I would like to take my next step for today in weaving some of his very beautiful, well thought out thoughts into where we go next. Because he said, when Rudolf Steiner created the Christian community, he gave about 30, I'm guessing, hour and a half long lectures, talks to the human beings, men and women who wanted to become priests of this new relationship, contemporary relationship to Christianity, powerful, a Christianity which eventually has an activity, a service, which is called the consecration of the human being. In some ways, it resembles the Mass of the Catholic Church strongly, but there's no relationship to the Pope and an absolute commitment to freedom that each individual in this movement is invited to take the communion, is invited to participate fully, but without this authority to some set of rules. It all depends on whether the individual feels called. And in his talks to the priests, Rudolf Steiner said to them that, dear priests, you must begin your work in the world when you go out in your churches by knowing the soul condition of the modern human being. And you must know that, here's the strong sentence, the soul condition of the modern human being is a lie. He says human beings either have the modern materialistic mindset, which reduces everything to materialism, in which perhaps some of you have heard it formulated like this. There is a conviction that the only things that are true is what can be touched, weighed, or measured, or counted. Things that have manifested in the material world. And anything else is dubiously mystical or emotional or whatever, but it's not truly real. Not unless you can get in and measure it, is it real? And he said, that eventually leads to the idea of no God, or no God that one can understand. a God that one can only hold on to by some kinds of faith. He said, no, this is not true. So the human being lives a lie. Of course, we could hone that a bit and say, but let's just stay with the way that he puts it in his talk. Either the modern materialistic mindset or the opposite, a nebulous spirituality, which imagines that there exists another world which is more real, a world of clouds and, I don't know, I'll make this up, angels with harps, but a happy ever after, that we can finally escape from this earth and have beauty and paradise. And that's also a lie. That's not the way it goes. And he said to the priests, and we can say to each other, we must find a new way. And we must find a way to ask in courage and clarity, what is a truth? How can we know what is true? And as this Michael Latham said this sentence, I felt this sense of reality in my heart addressed. Where is my own capacity for understanding truth? I know I weigh it against the core of my being and try to objectify it. And he says, well, let's look. We are faced with so many provocative thoughts as we try to come to terms with the world. And then he quoted some that come from scripture. Would you like to hear them? He says, for instance, the question of the statement, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believed in him would not perish, but would have everlasting life. And if we are going to be truly modern seekers, we have to ask ourselves, what do we do with that question? Is it just rubbish because it doesn't fit my materialistic mindset? Is it too nebulous? I can't understand. How can I experience that? And we're actually called upon to question that. Is there a God, and does he love the world? Or another question, another quote, God created the human being so that in time the human being would also become a God. What do we do with a sentence like that? Are you an animal? He asks us, I ask you, are you an animal? Are you a machine? Are you an accident? Are you just cells? What are you in your essence? And how can you find out? And then he said, okay, do we find any reality by looking at the world of nature? Minerals, plants, animals, what do we see there? And then, in all honesty, we must ask, how am I related to that which is all around me? Do I have a real relation? Am I a mineral, a plant, or an animal, or a machine? Or is there another relationship? What part of them is in me? What does it mean to be a human being? And I and many of you are so profoundly helped by the work of Rudolf Steiner, which lays down this path of thinking for us that we can understand my physical body is related to the minerals, and my plant is related to the biological life of the world. And my feeling life is related to the whole kingdom of animals. But what about this one? The self-consciousness in me, this biography that I trace. And can I remember past lives and the evolution that I go through in the future? And somewhere inside of us, we have a relationship to a picture that what we are now is not all that we will become, and possibly not all that we once were when we were not so cynical, when we were not so lost, when we were not so materialistic or distracted. There's a picture of a perfection, I dare say, only you can answer it for yourself, but a perfection that we were born out of and a perfection that we will grow towards. And then in his lovely talk, Michael goes back to talk about Genesis, how the Bible talks about the beginning of the earth and how the planets are in the sky. And these are related to the gods known as the Elohim. And they gathered, and this is one of the ways that Steiner talks about evolution. Sometimes Steiner is more conceptually scientific, but this is another language that he used, that the Elohim gathered around a middle point and meditated together. And what did they meditate? They meditated Arach Barach, which means the created. In the beginning, God created the Elohim Barach. And the first word that they created was, let there be light. And the light of consciousness that had been inside them was now outside of them. And the inner world and the outer began to communicate. We'll have to come back to this. Is this big jumps into big thoughts about what is thought? What is thought? What is the light of understanding? And I'll continue. You know, the human being, it says in the Bible, which I don't take exactly literally, but we can crawl into the levels of meaning. I'm not going to dissect it right now, but you can go deeper in it with Rudolf Steiner's lectures on Genesis. But he speaks about how the human being was created on the sixth day when God made the human being, and that human being was hermaphroditic, not yet male, female, both male and female. And that has something to do with the questions we face today when people are having questions. Am I essentially male or female, or is there a way to access an archetypal part of me, which is both? And big question, right? Big question. I don't think we need to try to answer that one here, but it's a profound question. We need to know where we come from. And we follow that all the way then into the Greek mysteries, the temples, the great temples of Apollo, the worshipers of the sun god, the words of initiation that the students always heard was, oh man, oh human being, know yourself. No, oh human being, know yourself. And I'd like to just have you let that word resound in your heart. It's a deep, deep, esoteric instruction. Know yourself. And I think we all, when we hear those words, I feel called to go on a quest. And I say, where do I look for that? Where do I look to know myself? Nature, the gods? Oh, human being, know yourself. Know where you come from and know where you're going to. And then stick with this a little bit longer. Coming from Genesis, but also from Rudolf Steiner's occult science, in the beginning, all the kingdoms, plant, mineral, plant, and animal, were inside the human being. And we were created out of beings. And this question, I mean very exactly, knowing that we were created out of all the kingdoms of nature, knowing this was cosmic wisdom. To know was to know who we are. And knowing this had another name, and that name is Michael. Oh, Michael. I know that some of you recognize that immediately. Michael means who is like God. Who is like God? And the name of this archangel is essentially an invitation for us to say, oh, human being, know yourself. And now we come to the present moment and say, do we know ourselves? Do we know ourselves, and are we aware of what we are doing and saying or thinking? Do we realize that whenever we tell a lie, whenever we tell an untruth, whether a bold and utter manipulation of truth or just a little white lie or a half truth, whenever we do that, we're creating wounds. Are we aware of that? And it's not, we don't just get away with these. They create wounds in our constitution. They create, well, Rudolf Steiner goes really far in that sense, some of his lectures on the karma of untruthfulness, and says we actually create phantom beings that live in our aura. An untruthful person is peopled by or is cannibalized by these beings, these monsters, he calls them phantoms and ghosts of untruthfulness that they carry along with them. And they get fat. The more untruths you tell, the more fat they get. And these are beings that hurt others, hurt the honest relationship of self to the divine spiritual world. They wound it. And they're also things that the person meets every night when they go to sleep and are unable to meet their good angel, their spiritual archetype at night. And they are also unable after death to find a clear passage to transformation in a next life. These beings of untruthfulness are one part of the whole problem that we face when we deal with technology. And in the weeks ahead, as we talk about the shadow forces that we're confronted with in our work with technology, we'll look at that even more deeply. This is a real problem. Are we aware that we create wounds, that we create karma that we have to work with? And then we go even deeper into trying to understand, is there help for that? We have the picture from esoteric Christianity. I invite you to understand this. If this is your first time to hear it, you might or might not. You might love it and you might say, that's too much for me, but take it gently. The humanity, because of our tendency to love the manifest world too much and deny the spirit, we began to lose the very real possibility of staying in touch with the Creator. Very real possibility. And that would have meant the real downfall of humanity. We would, in a way, eventually be lost to the creative gods. And Rudolf Steiner speaks of how one of the things that Christ did for the earth was it made it possible for us to stay in touch with our own karma so that in the course of our ongoing evolution, we would be able to heal what we have harmed. Otherwise, we would just make a whole environment of lies, and Christ can't clean that up. That's our responsibility. But he can make it possible for us, our inner divine essence, to stick with the project until we have made a world where we are developed. And that's very much where we are right now, where the lies are becoming ever so much greater. But the passage to the future is very close for us right now. But we human beings are connected with the earth, and Christ's deed on the earth wants us to stay in relationship with this earth. We cannot continue without this earth, the plants, the animals, the minerals. That's part of our foundation. We need it, and it needs us. So when you ask, what does it mean to be a human being? You have to say, we have to include the earth in that question. So Michael is the one who says, who is like God is the one who is known as the fighter of the dragon. And the dragon in mythology is not just that scaly beast that steals treasures and puts them in the cave. But if we try to untangle that mythology, the gold that the dragon would be hungry for is a picture of the sacredness that we are. And the dragon wants to steal it away, well, from us, to steal our future, and or to steal the possible future of the earth. And Michael, by having a very noble relationship to the Creator, is the one, and to Christ, is the one who said, let me show you, let me keep you in relationship to God or to the cosmic wisdom, so that your own egotism and selfishness and so on don't throw you off the track. And can you see that that's a picture of fighting the dragon? And so in great mythologies from the past, we have one of the pictures is in the Apocalypse. We'll look at that another time. But St. George and the Dragon is a Western mythology. And that is this dragon who is really eating off of the animal greed of the human being. And Michael is always fighting him, yet always looking forwards. In a way, you could say, or you can notice, that he doesn't look at the dragon lest he be pulled into that, but he can hold the dragon under his feet. And now there's a beautiful picture that in our age, Rudolf Steiner gives this picture, it's so lovely, where he says, in our time, from time to time, Michael changes that threatening look to the dragon and stretches his hand to humanity and says, literally this, follow me. I lead you to a higher divining of Christ's deed of death and resurrection. And he goes on to describe that Michael's gaze is earnest. He's not smiling and saying, come on, guys, let's do it. His gaze is earnest because the stakes are high. And he's also called the countenance of Christ, that he is awake and earnest and conscious. He cannot, will never tell people what to do. But essentially, he's always saying, find out what you're going to do, and I will take the harvest of the good deeds and help to weave them into the future of the earth, your earth. I will take them, but I must leave you completely free. And so we have this other characterization He will never interfere with our freedom. The gods no longer, the good gods, the white gods, are not allowed to interfere with our freedom in any way, but they are always present and saying that they live immediately in the etheric realm, immediately adjacent to the earth. And friends, I want you to think then of what we know about the deed of eurythmy and the deed of living thinking. Michael and the work of the good spiritual beings is in that same realm that we access when we do eurythmy. The living arts of the etheric. They're right there, Christ permeated with resurrection forces. And at the same time, and this is where we have to get with these talks in the weeks ahead, at the same time, the dragon forces or the technological forces are capable of subverting these forces of the etheric through the electricity and the magnetism and our addiction to the social media. They're able to subvert all of these forces of our possible future to the extent that we are not actively inhabiting it ourselves. So this is powerful. Now I would like to read for you. Let me go on. Just as we talk about Christ, this being of absolute moral love, the future, a being who in no way compels us to anything, but is 100% with our free deeds, love. It's as if I sometimes have the feeling there's a parallel reality to what's happening on the earth, or in the midst of all of the chaos of this earth, there's a whole river of etheric love that we are living in. And this is the Christ love, but there are what we call the anti-forces to this. Those of you who are familiar with Rudolf Steiner's work know that we talk about one being who is too much light, especially self-love, and another being who is too much darkness, especially greed. That's the spirit of materialism. The one is called Lucifer and the other is called Ahriman. And I would read for you a little bit here. I hope you've got enough attention forces to hear from these letters how Rudolf Steiner talks about Ahriman and Michael. And I'll try to not read every single sentence, but enough of them that you will get the essence. Michael was the being who in the past developed intellectuality, cosmic thinking through the cosmos. He developed this as a servant of those divine spiritual beings from which both he and the human being were born. And he desires to stay in constant contact to this relationship. He made the decision to enter into this relationship of helpfulness with humanity so that we would also always have a relationship to cosmic wisdom. Friends, I'm paraphrasing just a little bit. If you read it yourself, you'll find the words just a little bit different. Michael wanted to do this wholly in harmony with the aids of the divine spiritual beings whose servant he is, with whom he, like the human being, has been in connection from the time of the beginning. In Ahriman's case, there's an entirely different situation. This being long ago dissociated himself from the mainstream of evolution to which Michael and the others belong, and he set himself up in the past as an independent cosmic force. And he presently exists in the same world that we humans exist in, but he undertakes no joint effort with the human beings who belong there. It is only because in our age of the consciousness soul, intellectuality has now been freed for us to use in the earth. Ahriman has a way now to connect himself with the human being. And Ahriman is such a being that he's not capable of making intellectuality, that means wisdom or thinking, an inner capacity. So in his case, it remains an energy without any heart and soul involvement, flowing out of him as an ice cold and soulless cosmic impulse. Those human beings who succumb to Ahriman's gesture develop a merciless and loveless logic, although it seems to speak objectively, really issues from Ahriman. It is devoid of any true, heartfelt soul connection with what the person in question is thinking, saying, or doing. So if we just reflect on that for a moment, we see that signature in the corners of our contemporary society that we are concerned about. Cold, intellectual abstractions. Michael is a different way of thinking. Never acquired wisdom as his own personal attribute. In his case, this wisdom is every bit an attribute of heart and soul as it is of head and mind. For Michael is a bearer of all the primeval forces issuing from the gods and from man's origin. He gives to this wisdom nothing of a frigidly cold, soulless quality, but he is related to it with heartfelt warmth of soul. That is why Michael pursues his way through the cosmos with a grave gesture and expression. So he has to inwardly, to meet the challenge of avoiding putting any subjectivity or element of self-will into that content, or the logic would be synonymous with this self-will. Michael earnestly regards it as his position to stay strictly as the expression of cosmic being, and has to always keep his own personal will quiet. His attention is to the great concerns of the cosmos. He is in all respect grave. Now, I'll read just a little bit more from this wonderful essay. One imagine of Michael is the following. He reigns through the course of time, clad in light as his essential being, shaping cosmic warmth as a revelation of his nature. As a being, he conducts himself as a whole world, asserts himself only as he guides the world, guiding forces earthward from every corner of the universe. Yeah? Ahriman's is the opposite imagination. He would like to steal time away from space in his course. He sends rays of his own light into the darkness that surrounds him. The more he does what he wants to, the frostier grows his environment. He moves like a world completely compressed into a single being, like that of himself alone, asserting himself while denying the world. When an individual seeks freedom, with no tendency to egotism, when freedom becomes for him pure love of the action he is carrying out, then he finds it possible to approach Michael. But if he attempts free actions while tainted with egoistic striving, if his freedom means a proud exhibiting of himself in his deeds, he is in danger of straying into Ahriman's realm. So when we continue that line of thinking, that those imaginations, I would have to say, they point us to understanding what is consciousness. What is consciousness that is as clear and objective as thinking can be, bright, light-filled, but not egotistical. And in the first of these Michael letters that Rudolf Steiner writes, he said, in our time, it's no longer works just to have head thinking. The thinking with the head belongs very much to the age of the Industrial Revolution, the modern natural scientific way. It is correct for dealing with scientific phenomena. It works for the physical material realm, but to take this next step in evolution, we have to find a new way of thinking that hasn't existed like this before. This really bright light of thinking that the modern human being is capable of now has to unite with the warmth of heart. And so again and again, he says, hearts must learn to think. Hearts must learn to think. And then there develops a conversation between clear thinking and kindness and thinking in service of the world, that we weigh our thoughts to see what kind of thought is that? Is that a light thought? Is that an egotistical thought? And this pursuit of being takes us closer to the meaning of love and to really understanding what is Christ. Michael as the countenance of Christ, knowledge standing in front of great, compassionate, self-sacrificing love in order that the earth and human beings have a future. Dear friends, it hasn't been quite as long as I usually talk, but I'm going to take it to a close for this evening, take up some questions and conversation, and bring ever so much more next week as we begin to talk about etheric thinking and the technology and what we're facing. And I can guarantee in the weeks to come, we'll go so deeply into this. Listen, read the books which I have offered, grow your questions, and indeed, I implore you, I invite you to bring your friends along on this journey with you. This lecture series will be rich and important. And in all modesty, I must say, by virtue of the fact that I have this book, this German book, and that I'm a eurythmist, I feel like this is a work that I've been given to do, and I'm to place in the world. I'm very happy to share it with you. Thank you so much. Share it with other people. And before I open up for questions, let me just thank Michelle for being our guide, our host, and thank all of you for your donations. As I've said before, you make it possible. I couldn't possibly do it without you. So I'm very grateful.